everyone. Welcome to this after the one-shot behind-the-scenes episode of On the Shoulders of Giants. Our players for this one-shot were...
Hi, I'm Gerda, and I played a shaman-like druid called Kato, who was very firm in her beliefs, and we also have Katarina, who was an elderly female.
I'm Dominique, and I played Adra or Adra. The pronunciation went everywhere, but that's fine. She was a human ranger, and I also played Julia or Julie, who was a small child. Still unsure of the age. As I played, I was like, I have no idea, but
Kid.
She was just young and innocent, and I loved playing her. So yeah.
And I'm Melanie, and I played Jurgen, who was a stoic Goliath barbarian who did not like giants. And I also played Ilse, who wanted to be a scientist.
Yep. More on those characters, I imagine, later, as we're going to ask each other about each other's backgrounds and things.
Yes.
But first off, any thoughts? What do you guys think?
Oh, I loved it.
Loved it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like the amount of times, like right at the end of a recording as well, that I just sat here mind blown, going just like, oh my God.
Yep. And it was really funny because, you know, we were gonna like measure it in half an hour, and it just matched pretty well with what we were doing in the cliffhangers. So
and I really liked the feel of the one shot, like to explore different times, but do connect it with, because the thing of the dolmens, of the Hunnebedden, is something that is very known in the Netherlands, and it was very cool to not only have a fantasy aspect but the history aspect. I really liked that feel.
Yeah, me too. It was great.
Makes me want to visit one of them again.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just to imagine.
Definitely.
Put my hand on one of the stones.
Yeah.
We're very close to Asse a few weeks ago.
Oh, yeah.
For my nephew's birthday. But we did not have enough time to visit any, which was a shame, because I would have loved to have been to this one that featured here. This is day 15. So D15.
Oh, they number all
They do. And so we have a few in the Netherlands. I think we have 2 in Groningen, but on the border to Drenthe.
Yeah.
And then all of the rest are all in Drenthe.
Yeah. So in one province in the Netherlands, it's just in one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Pretty
Which,
much.
I think is very, very cool because we have some connection as Dutchmen to this part of the history, but it's so very, very local somewhere.
Yeah.
It is, but maybe we can take that as a starting point, because you've picked 2 very specific times since our first characters were tried for witchcraft, pretty much.
1648.
1648, yeah. And the main setting was prehistoric times. Like, what happens in your brain?
Yeah.
Why this? Why this?
In general, but you know.
A lot happens in my brain in general, but for this one shot, like seriously, a lot. Let me start with 1648, because that's a very specific period. It was the year Spain respected the sovereignty of what would become the Netherlands. But it incidentally was also the moment when Johan Picard actually moved to Koevoorde, still lived in his farmstead, and that was the period when he was writing his book. So all of that was kind of perfect for me so that is the time. It was also a moment in history when witchcraft was still a thing. But there were people who were changing views on it. I think the last time somebody was actually executed for witchcraft wasn't much later than that. So to have like a cast of characters who were witches and were tried for that, but not immediately executed, wasn't too far-fetched either. So like a lot of things that kind of worked out for my idea here. Johan Picard also went on the actual like trail that your character started on, past a few dolmen, and saw a lot of stuff. Something I want to mention at a later point, Celtic Fields, which is tied to Hunslow, which I'll mention in a moment. The prehistoric thing. So what I like to do as a DM is play with perspectives. So, for example, play or make two characters and play both of them, but at separate times, or have your character experience something from their past. In books, we have a lot of narrative devices, such as flashbacks and non-chronological storytelling, that in our normal D&D groups, that's not really utilized. So I think it's interesting to just see what would happen in a flashback in D&D. Would that work, or is that too much of a whiplash, for example? So the time period was around 3,200 years before Common Era, and so that's the time when people were making and were stopped making the dolmen. So it's the last part when they made those things, and it was before the Bronze Age, which I found that disappointed me because I wanted to add some bronze weapons and play a little with that. And so I started to kind of research what people were like back then. So something I really wanted to do for this session and this one shot was be very authentic, add history and history that makes sense, add in fantasy, because the dolmen weren't used for that and there weren't giants, but also infuse it with what people in 1648 thought about the dolmen and history and what they thought the people were like. So it's, again, a lot of perspectives, just kind of let you experience those perspectives on your own, basically.
But that is a difficult thing, because, I mean, there is quite a lot of research. You're holding a book that Picard actually wrote himself. I mean, he was a real-life figure.
Yes.
But at the same time, correct me if I'm wrong, we do not know why they used the dolmens. I mean, there are suggestions that it was for burial sites, but we do not know for sure. And the same is with like prehistoric times. We simply do not have a lot of information of like how things worked, apart from like hunter-gatherer stuff, and that's it.
Yeah.
Like actually, so how do you do that?
Yeah, I actually didn't even know that the Hunebedden were that old.
Yeah.
Like, I never actually really looked into the history of that, so I learned something new today. I did not know they were that old.
Yeah, to add to that, the earliest known pyramid was around 2500 before Common Era.
Whoa.
So these dolmen are actually older than that, and we already associate the pyramids as like these ancient things.
Yeah.
So I think that's very, very interesting.
That's such a weird thing to realize, because I know as a kid that I just played on them, and like my boyfriend broke his arm when he fell off of one. Like that's the experience of kids growing up in Drenthe. So that, wow, okay, mind blown.
Yeah, there's videos on YouTube from the Hunebedden Centrum, which are very informational, of stories of children who've now grown up, but dug around dolmen. Now, that wasn't allowed, but that didn't stop children from doing that. Mm-hmm. And so there's one person who dug up some very important finds and brought them to the museum, and then got told off because of it.
Oh, no way.
But I agree. It's really interesting just to find out more about it and what it is, because you're right, Gerda, we don't know specifically why. And that's obviously because it's prehistoric, so there's no writing. But still, there's other ways we can find out. And so the theory that these were used as burial mounds is not contested very much. So we're pretty sure that's what they were used for, because we find remains, we find objects. So these objects their tools or their pottery with residues of food in them. So we know that they also probably believed in an afterlife. And this is what Johan Picard tried to do. He's a child of his era, so he believes in giants, and he's a biblical literalist. So he believed in the flood, and he believed in a second flood, which is why he thought Drenthe was so wet, because of the remains of a flood.
So a literalist means that you just take everything word for word as it's in the Bible.
Yes, that's right.
But it's also, he's interesting because he does go like, okay, I don't think that this is the case because of this and this reason.
Yep.
So it must be giants.
Yeah. It's like I said, Picard was a child of his age. So there were things that he thought that are very obviously wrong. And it's very easy to look at him and go like, what an idiot, because we know better. And even for his age, there were peers of his that were, I don't want to say they were smarter, but they knew things that he didn't know, and they accomplished more things than Picard. He wasn't necessarily a super special person, except for the fact that he is pretty much the first person to write about the history of Drenthe. And in such a way that we can kind of go like, okay, he isn't a modern scientist, but for his age, he used a scientific-like method, looking at, okay, so it was probably not the devil who made the dolmen, because in the Bible it's never mentioned that the devil was into masonry. We also don't think it was the Romans, because we have remains of the Romans. They look way more sophisticated. So these dolmen are probably from way before the Romans. And so he goes through a few theories and goes like, none of those can be it. We know giants exist, so it's probably giants.
Yeah.
But
And you did play him kind of in that way as an NPC, because especially in the end, when it's just like when we say, with the dreams, and they slept on the things, you're almost like, okay, well then that's it. Yeah, I will believe you, random women that have visions, and tell me that this is the case. I mean, which is interesting. But if you speak in him in this manner, I imagine. I mean, that's kind of the guy he was, apparently. Like,
yeah, I mean, believing in giants wasn't totally absurd back then. So he is kind of smart, but also really not. It's a very difficult balance, a very difficult line to walk, because I didn't want to portray him as this total idiot necessarily. But that was his personality, I think. So yeah.
And like the NPCs you had in the prehistoric times, because you had the clan, you had Nilu, almost.
I forgot her name too.
Yeah.
And Ondo?
There's another NPC that's called Nilan or something. I don't know from where, but anyway.
Musk?
No, it's from a different campaign we've done where the daughter is called, but it's written completely different.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Anyway. But you had Nilu, you had the more tribal men following us, you had the giant Arwen, you had all those characters. What inspired you there? Like,
so Arwen, and I think that'll shed some light on your character as well, Melanie. Arwen, because your character's name, you guys asked about her character's name, Jörgen. Mm-hmm. There's Norse influence from that, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I took that, and I took the word for legacy in Norse, which is Arwen.
Oh.
So that is why he's called that.
So love that.
I like adding those kind of like Easter eggs in my sessions.
Also because giants in Norse mythology were also quite huge. They're a big part of that too.
Yeah, definitely.
So that was Arwen. I wanted him to be sympathetic, obviously, and for you guys to kind of find reason not to kill him. Very risky. And I wouldn't do this necessarily with every group. There are groups, and there's no right or wrong here, but there's groups who simply just kind of want to follow the story and who don't like being railroaded. And this is quite railroady, where I expect you to go along this one path.
Not in a bad way, though.
No.
But,
It's a misconception, I think, that railroaded campaigns are a bad thing. It's just a type of story, I think.
It didn't feel forced either. Like, to me, it felt like an opportunity to make my character grow. Because the only thing we heard beforehand, which is also maybe interesting to tell, is you live in this tribe in like prehistoric times, and basically you're fighting giants. Those are the enemy. So all of us made characters based on enemies are the giant. Or giants are the enemies. Brain. But I think that was also very interesting in that sense, where we had to do character development in a one shot, which I don't think usually you have the space or the opportunity to have a lot of character development in a one shot. So I actually think that was very unique and very interesting, and a very cool thing to do as well. So
because you're saying it completely right. You gave us the premise of these are your enemies, and then in our very first encounter with them, even before the combat happened, you had put in seeds like, they are not aggressive. They have wounded among them. They don't seem to want to fight, which was, you could feel it in the air as we were playing, like, out of character. We kind of don't want to kill them, but so it is. I think you did very well for something that moves quite linear story wise. To have that kind of, I loved it.
It's funny because I there was a moment in writing this when I had to decide, was I going to have you guys witness in game the death of Ondo? Ondo was always going to die. But I was thinking, like, so do I want to have you guys actually play that? This was way in the start, but I figured it'd be better not to do that and just kind of feel the impact afterwards of people mourning and his daughter, going through that whole process, and people going like, oh, they killed someone that we care about. Let's go get him. I think like D&D, I'm really big on making D&D a type of literature where, literature often is a mirror of society. And there are a lot of themes that I didn't even consciously write it in this story, but there's themes of refugees, of the cycle of hate, those kinds of things that I find very interesting to kind of tackle and see what players do with it.
And I think this worked into your favor, not on purpose. I mean, clearly the dice gods were with you, not in like rolls, but like you rolled quite low. But most of us did actually. But because this way, when Gruff died, there was in my mind that stands out as a moment versus if we would have started with the death of Undo, then that would have been an important thing as well. So in the end,
and I also think, because that was in a battle, so imagine we might have been part of the battle too. If Gruff had died in that fight, I don't think any of us would have tried to spare any giants. It's and it's funny because then you kind of start thinking about, okay, so what do you think has value personally versus what is ethical in this case? And obviously you want to do the ethical thing. But yeah, I think that's an interesting premise. So I don't think it's a bad thing you didn't include that first part.
No,
me too.
Other NPCs, the deer hunter and the bald man. Oh, and by the way, so to give you some insight, so it is quite linear, right? But I like to add consequences to actions and such, because those make the story meaningful. And I had written that had you not been able to catch that deer hunter, he would have blown his horn and attracted his entire group. So this encounter where Nilu was the one approaching, she would have been there as well. Egged on by those warriors, but it would have been like a last stand where you would have had to fight off those warriors while Arvin was stacking those things. So that didn't happen. But those men that would have attacked they're barbarians basically. That's how I portrayed them. They are technically an inaccuracy because at the time where we were playing, there weren't any hunter-gatherers anymore, not real hunter-gatherers. So I had to, those are from 4,000 before 0, I think. But I just needed a group of people that could be the other side of the giants, where Arvin, where you previously thought he was a bad guy, and then learned that he's not that bad. There had to be some other group that could fill that role.
Yeah. It worked out so well as well. Like the fact that there was this whole emotional moment and convincing, I forgot her name too. Nilu at the end. For some reason I have Eli in my head, but I know that that's not it. But if that moment with the hunter and Gruff hadn't happened, that would have also felt different. And I don't know how or why everything worked out the way it did, but it was perfect. I had such a good time. Actually, a question I still have, because you have the book from Johan Picard in front of you. Did you get that specifically for this?
I did, yes.
How did you even get to the idea of this all? Because you explained how you build it up.
Yeah.
But how do you even get to the concept to begin with?
How do you find the man? How do you find Picard?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure if I can answer that completely. I do know that at some point we knew we were going to do this one shot, so I had to write something. And I was wondering, I remember, I asked Gerda and Melanie about this. I was wondering, do I make this session about, say, something in the 17th century? Because that's a very interesting era with a lot of political stuff going on. The Netherlands was just coming into its own. Or do I do it about something prehistoric? Because I find that very interesting as well. It both gives you space to play with, or something... but at the same time kind of narrows it down, because there's not much story to use or to tell. And so at some point I was like, I'm going to do both. So I'm going to do something about something prehistoric and something 17th century-ish. And at that point, I just, you start looking up things, just reading, watching documentaries if there's any. I don't remember how I even got to Johan Picard, except for via Wikipedia, clicking links.
No sponsor.
No. Perhaps
Wikipedia needs sponsors.
Yeah, it does. Perhaps you guys recognize this process of going through Wikipedia and just clicking links, link after link after link, and it's just this line connection of one subject leading to the other, and at some point you reach someplace else. And I realized I do remember having the page for Volva first. So Volva is, interestingly enough, mainly a Norse myth as well. But Picard believed in it, so Picard was on the page of Volva, I think.
Wait, so that's also real?
Yes.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
I also didn't know about this at all.
No, it was new to me as well, because we know Witte Wieve,
that is a myth we know, witchy type people in the mist. Yeah.
But there's more than that. And that's also something I've been searching for myth makers, finding the really obscure myth of our country. Giants, I had no idea was part of that either, for example, but people believed in giants apparently.
Yeah.
So
yes, we have another one shot that plays around Steens, which is a village in Friesland, where there is this myth that giants have dug this canal of water. Channel? That they have dug
canal.
that. Canal, thank you. That they have dug this, which is very interesting because it's not something in our culture that we discuss a lot about myths or legends, or it's not something that's quite prevalent. Apart from the Witte Wieven, like you said, that is definitely something that I've heard of. But yeah.
And there's local stories too, but like the general, like the Norse have these big myths and stories. We probably have them too, but I wouldn't know.
The Irish also have these amazing stories. Yeah.
Yeah. Even going more south to France and Germany, for example, I feel like they have more prevalent myths as well. But we have them. You just have to know where to find them. And all the stories I've written for Mythmakers so far are just very local things, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
That story in Steens, because Melanie and I recently moved there, I had no idea about.
Yeah,
so that's something.
Sitsa wrote it.
Oh, that's in Steens?
Yes.
That's insane.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that. I really like that.
Yeah, but it's fun. Can I ask you, because I have one question that kind of plays with what is fantasy and what is history? Because, I mean, you put giants in the story, but I mean, we do have this legend about Grutte Pier, which was this giant Frisian dude of like 2 meters, but these were actual giant, which was a mystical aspect. But apart from that, I mean, I brought some ritual stuff with my character, but nothing that I wanted to portray as like, here is a magic beam. Only in the end did you do full-on magic with let's put paint and whoosh magic passageway. I imagine that was a specific choice from your side.
Yeah, I mean, I ask you guys, I was always open for having other races, and I felt like Goliath in Melanie's case made a lot of sense as well, particularly because you could frame that as a half giant. But I asked you guys to, like, if you wouldn't mind, make a human character, because this was always was going to be a more grounded experience. But as I said, like this story isn't just historical or the perspective of Picard. There's also fantasy, and I feel like it's okay to add that and have the experience that we are still kind of used to. In the case with the dolmen lighting up, that was going to be that last flash that your characters could also leave out to Picard's story, because that's obviously not in the book, his book that he wrote. A lot of other stuff is. And so, like, we make stories as well as humans. It isn't just fantasy or myths from the past. We are still making stories this way. And there isn't much difference between the myths from the past and the stories that we make, except for time difference, really. And the fact that we know a little bit more. But even now, there's stuff that we think that's probably not true.
Yeah. And in a couple hundred years, they're going to be talking about and going like, they were so stupid.
Exactly. So I think it's important to keep that bit of culture going and realize that.
Yeah. Actually, at the Hunebedda, the paint that you put on it, is that actually a real thing too or not?
Completely fabricated.
I was like, I didn't know that, but okay.
That was believable enough to be true. So
that's cool.
Skirting the line of what is true, what is not true.
Especially after the vulva thing, I'm like, what is reality?
Real?
Yeah. And because we are running out of time in a moment for this episode, but I did want to mention one more thing, which is Hunslow.
Yeah.
Because the Celtic fields. Okay, so Picard saw foundations in the ground. He was writing his book. He was like digging up stuff, and so he thought there were giants in this area, and so he saw those foundations, and he figured that must have been a city, and so he called that city Hunslow, which is in the one-shot information that you told him, but he actually came up with that name because of where it was located, that city.
That's amazing.
he made a picture, which you can look that up on the internet as well. If you look up Hounslow, it is a rectangular city, just with plots. He thought that at some point when the giants left, Romans took over. At some point in around 800 after zero, Vikings came and burned it down. And so there's nothing left except for the foundations during his lifetime. Turns out it's not a city. It's simple Celtic fields, which are very ancient, but just farming fields. And they were surrounded by stone hedges.
That's so cool.
That is a one shot in and of itself. Just
I had to include that because I was thinking this is our very own Atlantis.
Yes,
a fake
I love
city.
That. Fake city.
That's gone.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, what a way to end this. Love that.
Yes. Amazing.
Thank you, Derek.
Yeah.
Thank you guys. I always enjoy doing all of it.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, that's it for this episode. I imagine the next episode will continue some more discussion. But for now, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.